So, so if you're not already on mute, if you don't mind putting yourself on mute, just so that we can get through this without any type of interruption. I feel like I know most of the people on here, but my name is Benny Matthew. I'm actually the founder of Orion3, which is a company where I'm actually leaving my regular job for tomorrow or Friday and going all in on Monday. But it's a community of business leaders from Chicago that I've gotten to know over the years and over the last couple of years that actually want to make an impact in Chicago in the business community and the lives of people professionally and personally. So one of the things that a lot of people are struggling with right now, have questions on, have uncertainty on, is what do we do about going back to the office, especially in a metropolitan area like Chicago, where we rely on public transportation a lot. We're vertical, right? It's high rises. We're not in one-story buildings, so we have to worry about elevators. We have to worry about all these things that are happening. And I live downtown, so for me, the last year has been personally like, I don't even know the right words to use, but it's like when I look out into the loop, it is literally a ghost town, or it was a ghost town. So, and I think most of the people that I talk to are thinking, we want to figure out a way to come back to the office. We just don't know how. Or, do we have to make employees come to the office, or what exactly, what's happening now that we have a vaccine? There's so many different things. So I have 3 friends that are actual experts. I'm not. So I'm going to have them give a brief intro on themselves. And the way we'll do this panel, since all 3 of them are talking about 3 different topics, is it'll be like a one-on-one, me asking them questions individually, and then after all 3 are done, then we'll go into somewhat of a Q&A session. So so we'll go in order of the people that I'm talking to, and I have all 3 of them introduce themselves. Brad, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, hey everyone. Really excited to be here, Brad Serot. I'm actually talking to you from my office at downtown Chicago at 321 Clark, and I was already here, so I mentioned that earlier. I'm not here staging this for this talk. I was actually touring a company that was actually looking at re-entry and opening up their office a moment ago. So, but I'm a vice chairman at CBRE, and I have been in commercial real estate for almost 20 years now, and I lead our tech practice group. So I represent, early stage companies all the way through publicly traded and everything in between. And I'll be able to give you some perspective of the hundreds of conversations I've had personally with my clients over the last year since COVID, plus a lot of really good data points from my company, CBRE. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Stacy?
Hey, I'm Stacy Osmond. I'm an attorney over at DLA Piper. We are a large international law firm. We have offices across the US. I am out of our Chicago office. This is not our Chicago office. We're still working from home. So I'm out of Naperville today. I have a broad practice that focuses on commercial real estate and includes all sorts of transactions that touch real estate, including acquisitions, dispositions, leasing, financing, real estate investment, and joint ventures and development. My clients, they span across industry sectors and range from small startups to investment firms to international corporations.
Awesome. Thanks, Stacy. Amanda?
I'm Amanda Schleede. I'm CEO of Vital Circle. Vital Circle is a women-owned business based here and headquartered in Chicago. And we started with the pandemic. We are actually a web-based daily symptom tracking app that has included into it a contact tracing wearable device that is non-GPS, non-biometric, and non-cell phone dependent.
Awesome. And I'm really looking forward to, I think most people on here don't understand, like me before I met you, what contact tracing really is, besides for the calls from the Cook County Department of Health or whatever, asking who you talk to. So I'm looking forward to having you talk about that. Awesome. So sounds good. So I have some, obviously, to make this be fluid and efficient, I wanted to make sure I had some questions that I could ask. And if you guys are thinking of questions as you're listening to the panelists, feel free to just save it for the end of, after all 3 are done, because we will have a Q&A side. So we'll jump right in, and I'll start with Brad. Brad, so when, and you and I talked about this before, when are we getting back to the office, or are we going back to the office at all, you think? What are you seeing?
All great questions. And these are conversations literally having daily, often and always with all of our clients. And the first thing I just want to say is that remote is here to stay. So working from home and a portion of that is here to stay. But on the contrary, the office isn't going anywhere. And so I think if you peel back over the last 5 years, we did a really good job as corporations, as companies, of densifying, getting more efficient, but also embracing flexibility. And if you look, in fact, the average employee pre-COVID was coming to the office 4.2 days a week. So we started that flexibility even pre-COVID. And when we surveyed 10,000 of our employees, Benny, it suggested that number in a post-COVID world is going to drop a day to 3.2 days a week. And we have so much data, and a couple other stats that I want to just mention to the group is that of the 10,000 employees we surveyed, 52% of them felt more productive working remote in this remote environment. But that comes at a price, because 75% of those employees feel more isolated and disconnected from their peers and their companies than ever before. So there's this dichotomy that's going on. One of the things that's really interesting is that a lot of our clients are saying that remote has just worked really, really well. And there was an article that I actually posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago. It was from Fast Company about why remote works so well. And one of the highlights is that companies and our clients built such good cultures and connectivity leading up to COVID that it was a really seamless transition, because they had such good connectivity and sense of purpose with their employees that they shared. So transitioning into remote was pretty easy. But the bottom line is that 81% of all companies want to come back to the office. 75% of employees want to get back to the office and see their peers in some capacity.
So when do you think we'll start seeing the shift of when people are going to, in Chicago especially, like people are going to slowly start coming back to the office part-time?
Yeah, so I'm downtown today because I was just touring a fast growth company that's looking to get back to the office now. So a really small percentage of our clients, that's not the majority, a really small percentage of our clients. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
A really small percentage of our clients want to get back to the office now. They're looking at, they have visibility into their businesses. The majority are planning for fourth quarter of 21 or first quarter of 22. And again, I just want to remind everybody that we're planning, as we're thinking about these sort of discussions, it's to plan for a post-COVID return. There's going to be a semblance of health checks or wearing masks and some separation at first as we transition back. But we're not planning for a COVID environment, because if we were, we would just stay remote.
So what does this mean for the actual physical office space, especially in our concrete jungle of Chicago?
So, if you look at the stat of losing a day, so if employees are coming in a day less, 3.2 days on average a week, and if I was to interview every single person on this Zoom to say, if you were coming in 3 days a week, what days would you come in? Chances are a very low percentage of you would come in on Monday, and an even lower percentage are coming in on Friday. So that means Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday is the majority of days that people are going to be coming in. And so how do you accommodate for everybody? Do you just get rid of 30% of your office space overnight? The answer is no. Chances are we're going to see some modification of more collaboration space within offices. And, if I had to give you sort of a percentage of reduction in office space, if you add more collaboration space, take away a day, it's probably going to be 8 to 10% decrease in office space on average.
What does it mean for the real estate market?
So there was actually an article that came out in Cranes yesterday, was it a couple of days ago, about how advantageous the market is, and we're in a tenants market. And the answer is we're swinging back into a tenants market. It's been a landlord's market for the last decade. So as a tenant advisor for almost 20 years, I couldn't be, candidly, I'm more excited and optimistic, because the rental rates are down 10 to 12% from where they were pre-COVID, and concessions are up 150% from where they were pre-COVID. So I think that the real estate market's going to take a hit. our tenants are gonna be in a very advantageous position when they do decide to go back to the office.
Got it. So with everybody that's on the call, everyone, as far as I know, is from the Chicago market, business leaders that work for different companies. So what does it mean if let's say, if somebody has a little bit of time still left on their lease, if somebody has a lease that's a lot more left, or someone that doesn't have a lease right now? Like, what does it mean for them as business leaders of companies in Chicago?
So there are a small percentage of our clients that had leases that expired during COVID. That's not the majority, and that they're staying virtual in the near term. But look, we're having conversations with everybody, whether you have a long-term lease, a short-term lease, no lease at all, as you're trying to either plan for your return back to the office, if you're looking to take advantage of the real estate market, if you're trying to track like where's your labor going and how does this affect it, and should you modify your space. So I just think that, the only thing I do know is that everyone's craving human interaction. Everybody does want to, the vast majority wants to get back to the office in some capacity. And I believe there's so much pent up demand that we're going to be into like the roaring 20s. I think that the 3 martini lunch may be coming back. I don't know when this thing's over, but there's
on my 4th right now. So
see, there you go. Sam Zell, quoted that no one's getting promoted on Zoom. And, he says that in passing. I kind of chuckled a little bit, but it's really hard to prove how hard you worked as a professional when you're on Zoom and you can only see or visit with somebody 30 minutes to an hour a day. So listen, I'm optimistic for the office market, for return to the office. I'm going to play the optimist. I know that my counterpart's going to be a little bit more of a pessimist in this conversation. So
he's talking about Amanda, by the way. But
yes, I'm talking about Amanda. I didn't want to name it. You said it.
But it's a good thing we have common middle ground with the legal perspective from Stacy. But Brad, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. If you guys don't know Brad, I highly recommend. Even right now, his name is on his screen here. You can connect with him on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions, obviously. So with that, we're going to get to no problem. With that, we're going to get to the legal perspective from, so I'm sure most people here know of DLA Piper, the firm, one of the top 3 in the world. And Stacy happens to be the attorney in Chicago that focuses on the real estate side, especially commercial real estate. So she's going to talk about a lot of the legalities of some of the things that that are happening. And I actually had a bunch of questions for Stacy, and she told me, Benny, no, like I can't say these things because I work for DLA Piper and I'm an attorney, so I'm going to be limited. So she did still say yes to several ones, and I'm going to try to go in order. So Stacy, what can a tenant do to put itself in the best position possible if they want to negotiate a lease termination or a reduction of space with the landlord?
So this is, we've been seeing this question since COVID effectively started. And then, now as companies are still looking at their space needs, they're thinking about, if we're not going to come back, we're going to come back in not for a long time. Can I terminate this lease? Can I get rid of this expense on my balance sheet? And in short, the tenant should be prepared to answer questions and substantiate why it needs a lease termination or reduction of space to the landlord. If its business has suffered during COVID, financials that show that are helpful. But of course, financials can also evidence, at least from a landlord's perspective, that the tenant can still pay rent. So whatever's being provided should be closely evaluated before sent over to the landlord. Next, I would definitely suggest putting together a reasonable offer to present to the landlord when you go to them asking for a termination or reduction in space that takes into account the effect of the termination of the lease that it's going to have on the landlord. I mean, of course, paying rent is having an issue on the tenant, but the landlord also has their own mortgages and liabilities that they have to pay for. So it makes sense to go to them with hat in hand, but also with a reasonable offer. And generally, a tenant should expect to pay a termination fee of some kind. And we've been seeing those amounts of those fees range, largely based on a couple of factors, including how long of lease term remains and the value of the rent for the remainder of that term. Is there a guarantor on the lease or a security deposit of some kind? And what's the ability of the tenant to pay the remaining value of the lease. For example, do you have a tenant that has assets, it's an operating entity, or do you have a tenant that's a single purpose entity without any assets and there's no security deposit on the lease? Those create vastly different negotiating powers for the tenant, and something to take in, that gets taken into account when determining the termination fee. Next, I mean, I would just say in general, from my experience, negotiating these terminations is a lot easier when the tenant's not already in substantial default. That is, going to a landlord when the tenant's behind 1 month versus 6 is often a way easier conversation, because usually the landlord, in addition to looking to the future and what they're going to lose in the future, they want to look at, you know, what have they already lost? So if they're 6 months behind, they're going to want to often to be made whole for those 6 months of rent that's been missed, plus looking forward to the remainder of the lease term. And then I would just say, in general, a tenant should review its lease carefully and see, is there any lease provision that might support an argument for them that they have a right to terminate, or something that they can, you know, put out there to increase their negotiating power. At the end of the day, these termination conversations turn a lot on just who has the negotiating power at the time.
Got it. What if a company wants to sublease?
So subleasing, that's a popular option right now, and I'm sure Brad has some stats on how hot of a sublease market we have right now and how many properties are on for sublease. So I guess first let me clarify what a sublease is. So a sublease is an agreement that's entered into between the existing tenant and of the space and the subtenant. The landlord's not a party to that, and the original tenant remains liable for the space and all obligations under the original lease. So accordingly, the landlord's going to continue to have liability under the existing lease. So it's a common misconception that if you sublease the premises for the remainder of the term, that you have no further liability for the space, and that's not the case. So
it's 5.3 million.
Yeah.
5.3 million. Yeah.
And from Brad, from a percentage standpoint, do you know offhand like how high we've increased?
Yeah, it's been 150% increase since COVID started.
Yeah.
And, you know, it hovers around, you know, 3 million square feet. So we've had 2.3 million square feet increase. We think it'll probably be up to 6 million square feet by the end of the year.
Yeah. So then I would say, like, as an initial step, I would recommend just discussing with a broker like Brad about the sublease market overall and how that specific space is going to, you know, how is it going to play and what the brokers think about that. From more of a legal standpoint, thinking about subleasing, I would recommend taking a look at the lease generally and understanding what rights the original tenant here has with respect to subleasing. So look at the sublease and assignment provision in the lease. Most likely, the tenant's going to need to go to the landlord for consent to for that sublease. The lease probably has other provisions relating to sublease, such as a recapture clause and a profit sharing clause. Both of those likely are not going to come into play, but just to explain what those are, Benny, a recapture clause is a right of the landlord to terminate the lease in lieu of consenting to an assignment or a sublease. And those can get kind of annoying if you go all the way down negotiating a sublease and then the landlord throws a wrench. And then a profit sharing clause is applicable generally in a good market when the sublease rent exceeds the rent under the existing lease. So these clauses require that profit be shared with the landlord in some fashion. Usually 50 to 100% will go to the landlord in those cases. A couple other things to think about with subleasing is that the lease may have limitations on marketing and require the landlord's consent to even market the space. So again, tenants should read their sublease and assignment clauses in their existing lease and just make sure that, you know, they're following all of the restrictions in those provisions. And then one final thing I'll mention, Benny, is that often there are lease rights that a tenant may lose by subleasing the space. So these are those kind of like special rights in a lease, like renewal options, expansion options, termination options, even sometimes signage, parking, and other rights can be terminated if the tenant subleases. So depending on the situations, that could be problematic. So just overarching, look at your lease.
Okay. The other thing, and I think this is the one that you told me I can't ask you all these specific questions on. So we'll leave it vague and let you talk about it because it entails employees' rights, vaccines, things like that. So is a company required to take any precautions when employees return to the office, Stacy?
Yeah, so this is definitely a tricky concept and something that's on everyone's mind right now. So just the overarching concept is that an employer needs to provide a safe working environment free of hazards. So, but unpacking that a little bit, that has a lot to it. So an employer could establish, specific legitimate health safety standards and policies and requirements related to health and safety, but they generally need to be job related and consistent with business necessity. Great places to start on that analysis are looking at the applicable guidelines from the city of Chicago, the state, CDC, other government agencies, and then guidelines for the applicable trade groups. So I won't go through all the various guidelines, but I will say that a lot of clients are trying to stay within the bounds of their peer group as it relates to back to office. There's definitely a liability risk to not having appropriate back to the office plan, back to the office procedures, or with respect to plans that fall below what I'll just quote as like industry standards. So you kind of want to stay within what your peer group is doing and what the governmental agencies are recommending to try to stay in kind of a safe zone here. Of course, this is a case-by-case analysis, depends on all sorts of different factors. So definitely recommend discussing all back to the office plans with an employment lawyer and appropriate HR professionals. I think the other part, Benny, that kind of goes to this is the question about dealing with vaccines and whether an employer needs a vaccine plan for returning to the office and whether the vaccine should be mandatory for their workplace. Mm-hmm. In short, the short answer is employers can generally make mandatory a vaccine against diseases that have been recognized as a pandemic. But implementation of that requirement is tricky and raises a lot of employment and privacy issues because we're still overarching issues. You have ADA and privacy issues that are always still out there. That regulatory regime hasn't changed from COVID, so we still have to be mindful of that and asking questions about disabilities, for example, big ADA issue that needs to be watched for. So I will say that employers should be thinking carefully about their vaccination plan and policy. Again, I would recommend talking about it with employment counsel. I will give a plug here too. Benny, DLA gave a presentation on vaccine plans. They spoke for like an hour about it. So we can share that link to the group too. And some employment professionals went very specifically into employment laws with respect to them as well.
Yeah, actually, Abby, you're on this. If you want to put it in the chat for everyone, you could do that.
Yes.
Or you can email it, doesn't matter.
I will throw it in the chat right now.
Perfect. Thank you. Stacy, thank you. I appreciate that. I was going to ask you about the whole, how much can an employer mandate and can they make the employees go back to the office? And you kind of told me to, shut up, Benny. So
it's very specific on, case by case point. And, some of it's not super clear right now. So definitely need to talk to the right employment lawyer and go through your specific situation to talk about that.
Yeah. And
like Benny, we're a Fortune 120 company, and our CEO came out and publicly said that they're not going to mandate a vaccine right now. Obviously, they're going to watch what the CDC recommends, to Stacy's point, because they can't. How do you do that? It gets very slippery. There's an ethical component to it too. So it just, but again, we're having, just like Stacy, we're having those conversations with clients. They want to know, what are their peers doing? So no one's obviously that I know of has implemented it yet, because there's so many different aspects to it, but it's definitely being discussed.
Absolutely. So like I said with Brad, Stacy's, you can connect with her on LinkedIn. I think that'd probably be the best way to go about it if you're not already connected with her. And she's a great person too that you can, if you have questions on things like this, that can answer. So go to the last one. I was joking when I said she's negative Nancy. I
like the big sigh, the last one.
No, but she's Amanda is the CEO of a company that was formed in COVID called Vital Circle. She's actually, I personally had no idea what contact tracing was until Amanda and I became friends, and she told me about everything that she does. And I think it's actually really cool what Vital Circle does, but also the concept of contact tracing. And I think I think technology is going to play a huge role in how our work life is going to be in the near future. So I wanted her to be able to explain what contact tracing really is, the benefits to it, and also, you know, the thing that I think people think about the most, which is the privacy concerns. So, Amanda, I wanted to make sure I had some questions written out so that we don't get away from the topic.
I was gonna say, I just like start to rant and rave for hours so I can talk about this.
Yeah, so actually I take that back. It's more so that you don't rant and rave. So, so question number one, contact tracing. I didn't know what it meant until I met you, and you told me everything about it. So can you talk about what does it really mean, and how can it be done in a way to protect people's privacy and concerns?
Yeah, so I mean, again, guys, I have I think I've educated Benny on contact tracing more than he wants to know. Sometimes we get off the phone or after a drink and he's like, oh, I didn't need all that or all that negativity. So I'm going to try to be positive today. But so contact tracing, you know, there's really three ways that you can look at doing contact tracing in the world. So we are all aware of the person-to-person contact tracing that started, you know, City of Chicago put millions of dollars into it, have hired people living within neighborhoods to do it. You know, the issue we're finding with the contact tracing of person to person, number one, people are not picking up their phones. And people are not being honest about the contacts. So the issue there is really, you know, you have to be willing to be part of it and be able to be, you know, open and honest and forthcoming with regard to the interactions you've had. Plus also to some extent, remember the interactions you've had. You know, so they did a recent survey of individuals who are doing contact tracing and then people who actually participated in the actual contact tracing. Most contact tracers in Chicago get between 10 to 15 contacts a day to reach out to. They are likely only connecting on the phone with about 4 to 5 of those, and only about 3 to 4 of them are actually answering questions. And then when they went back and reviewed and surveyed those people who actually participated, those people, over 50% of them admitted to purposely leaving out contacts or realizing after their call that they forgot about people that they should have reported in. So there's obviously a huge error, you know, percentage here. The other way of doing contact tracing is through, you know, devices that have GPS. So think about your cell phone. You know, early on in the pandemic, you know, any app that was downloaded to Apple or iOS for symptom tracking or contact tracing resulted in GPS tracking. So you actually knew the GPS coordinates. So you knew if the contact was at McDonald's, you knew if the contact was at Whole Foods. And then the third way of doing it is really where we focus, and, you know, happy to off topic or, you know, another time talk to anybody who wants to dig into it. But we do device, Bluetooth IoT device contact tracing. So basically for us, we have very small wearable devices that individuals wear, and as they're interacting within an office space or an event or with people, those devices are recording the device-to-device connection. So we have nothing to do with biometrics. So it's not like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch where we're getting contacts, yet we're also getting your resting heart rate and non-resting heart rate and steps and all that stuff. There's no GPS coordinates, and then there's no dependency on cell phones. You're on mute, Benny.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was like,
what's the next question?
I thought my computer froze, but
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like,
no.
I'll give you a quick, like, I looked up this data because I didn't want to be super negative, Nancy, but like I looked at the Chicago contact and tracing data. There's over 937,000 cases. Okay. They attempted to contact 576,000 of those. So 61% of the people they attempted to contact but did not connect with, and only 48% of those then they actually connected with and had a conversation. And that's just City of Chicago.
And by that time, it's too late.
Right.
Exactly. Because, yeah, I mean, to Brad's point, you know, if I'm a contact tracer and I get a report today that I need to call Benny because he's got a COVID positive case, okay? Benny's likely had his test anywhere between 3 to 5 days ago and just getting his results. He likely waited a day or two to get a test, and then he likely felt bad or didn't feel good for 2 or 3 days. So you're really looking at all that time. Plus then you have the infection period before that. So it's not really looking at like the last 5 days of interactions. It's really looking at the last 21 days of interactions. You know, so how many of you guys here can remember what day you went to the grocery store 3 weeks ago? I can't.
I don't even remember what day it is these days. I mean, it's like, it's just.
It's Wednesday.
Time is different.
Yeah.
So obviously I've seen your devices and like, we know each other well, like at what point should a company, or if a company is planning an event, like think about actually doing contact tracing in the sense of like what you guys do? Is it manufacturing companies? Is it events? Is it office spaces? Is it high rises? At what point does a company need to think of it as a viable option to keep their employees safe and their privacy is protected?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, you know, I say we're industry agnostic, meaning that, you know, you get a situation where you're putting people together and we can help you. You know, our goal is, and really the goal of any kind of contact tracing or symptom tracking, is to know the health of your population. And, you know, right now, and Stacy can probably chime in on this, you know, when it comes to EEOC and, you know, the pandemic, you know, actions that they've put in place, you know, as an employer, you can ask, you know, very high level questions, but know the health of your employees. Not, do you have high blood pressure or diabetes or hypertension, but, you know, do you have symptoms of COVID today? You know, have you been in contact with somebody who's COVID positive in the last 24 hours? You know, in the city of Chicago, have you traveled out to a restricted state? You know, right now, if, you know, there's a huge number of states, I didn't look to see what the actual number is like as of today, but, you know, before it was like, I think it was Virginia or Vermont and Hawaii about in December that we were the only two states that an Illinois resident could travel to and not have to quarantine for 2 weeks when they came back. And so, you know, really what we're looking at is how do you look at the health of your population when you do have an individual who self-reports of either COVID positive symptoms or a COVID positive case? Then how do you mitigate the risk of your the rest of your population? So again, if I, you know, pop up COVID positive or symptomatic today, you know, and Benny and Stacy and Brad and I work in the same office space and we've been together over the last week, 2 weeks, you know, how do I identify which employees Amanda or myself has come in contact and had significant contact with? You know, and according to the CDC, you know, significant contact is a cumulative of 15 minutes. So it's not you and I sitting and having a conversation today for 15 minutes. It's the 5 minutes yesterday and the 7 minutes the day before and the 3 minutes the day before that. But it's that 15 minutes of cumulative time over with under 6 feet. And so with devices, you know, wearable devices that, you know, again, I don't, you know, my devices don't, you know, I don't need to talk only about my devices, but devices that are Bluetooth and non-GPS, you know, focused, they don't know where they are. They don't know they're in Chicago. They don't know they're on the 15th floor of the Aon building. Like they don't have any of that information. They literally just know that Amanda, who's wearing device A, and Benny, who's wearing device B, has had 28 minutes of contact in the last 5 days at 6 feet or less. And so then as an employer, or a leader of an organization, you can then look at that hard data and say, wow, Amanda's COVID positive today. Benny's had this interaction. To mitigate the risk of Benny giving it to Stacy, Stacy exposing Brad, Brad exposing Richard, you know, we're going to mitigate that risk. And we're going to say to Benny, even though you don't have symptoms or you're not COVID positive, we want to mitigate that risk and have you work from home for the next 5 days. We'd like you to get a COVID test, whatever your company policy is. And that again is where Stacy's zone of genius comes in about the employer, you know, employee relationship.
See, this is not as negative as I thought, Amanda, because actually,
Yeah, I was expecting
as
a
people
lot
are
worse.
coming back to the office, you're going to help them track in a better format, right? Using your technology, keeping their office safe. So, okay,
Exactly.
you're not negative
Well,
at all.
I have all these negative numbers about like how many deaths we've had and like, you know, the vaccination rate. I mean, like right now, I mean, Lightfoot said, I think it was like 3 weeks ago on a Sunday news thing that it was at the current rate that Chicago, so Cook County is getting the vaccinations, not the current rate that they can give the vaccination, but actually receive. It will take 71 weeks. That is a year and a half to vaccinate every Cook County resident. And that's only if everybody who, when your number comes up, you get in line. And I got to be honest, I'm like 11 million and something. So I'm going to be waiting for a while. So because of that, like, how do we in Brad's, point of view, like, how do we re-energize the economy? Like, how do we get people, like, I live in Chicago, just like Benny and everybody else. I look out my window and it's like 7 o'clock on a Sunday all the time. So like, how do we, create those downstream effects of getting people back into the office spaces? So, obviously Brad's zone of genius of let's get people back, let's get workers back in the office space. But there's a downstream effect that comes with that, because if your workers are coming to work, guess what? They're going to the food court and buying food. They're dropping off their clothes at the cleaners in their building. Like all this stuff starts to happen. And how can we do that safely how can we do that safely and also be aware of if there is somebody who becomes COVID positive, how do we mitigate that risk?
Got it. So what about, you mentioned the vaccines, and obviously you have a lot of data on it, and I'm appreciative of everything that you told me the last couple of weeks, but what do employers or business leaders in Chicago need to be aware of when having employees come back to the office as it relates to the vaccines?
Yeah, so the vaccine rollout has not been as fast as we all thought it would be, obviously. As of right now, out of 330 million Americans, we only have 15.1 million Americans vaccinated. So if you want to think about that in a different way, that's one egg out of a dozen of eggs. You know what I mean? So the vaccine, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I believe that, the vaccine is something that we need to be having. I will get in line when my number comes up at 11 million and something. But the vaccine is not going to be the silver bullet that's going to save us right now. And this is where I get into my negative Nancy stuff. Herd immunity is 75 to 80%. Right now, just with high level numbers, 46% of adult Americans got the flu vaccine last year. And the flu vaccine has been around since the 40s. So if that's the number of the flu vaccine, on top of the fact that 50% of America, or almost 50% of America, thinks that this is a hoax and that the actual numbers about COVID deaths are not true, how are we going to hit a herd immunity of 75 to 80% on top of the fact that we don't even know what the long-term effectiveness of the vaccine is? Like, once you get your second shot, or once you get your shots, is it effective for 6 months? Is it effective for a year? If we turn around and it takes 71 weeks to vaccinate, all Cook County residents, by the time they get to me, does that mean the 65 and over, with, chronic diseases and the essential workers who've already started to get their shots, that they're now going to be immune and need another shot? So there's all these things that are up there. And so I think the thing is also, from an employer standpoint, to kind of bring it full circle, is just that employers need to know that they're going to be bringing people back that are going to be vaccinated and people who are not going to be vaccinated. I'm not going to get in, step on Stacy's toes. I'm not going to get into the legal side of it, but an employer or an employee can say, I don't want the vaccine because of religious reasons, or, whatever the reasons are. Right now, the military, a third of the military is refusing to get the vaccine.
So Amanda, like somebody actually asked a question, you talked about this earlier, but if somebody in your office has a COVID case, and how do you announce that appropriately for HIPAA? And
yeah, internally for us, everybody who's on our system, there's a text and email functionality. And so what we can do from our administrative side is actually send, a text message or an email. So in the case where I've used myself as an example, and I would reach out to Benny. I would say to Benny, Benny, you've had significant contact with somebody who's COVID positive, confirmed COVID positive or symptomatic, and here's what we would like you to do. From a HIPAA standpoint, we are HIPAA compliant. We're not sharing any of my personal data. So I highly suggest, and I'm assuming Stacy would chime in, raise your hands, jump up and down, that you are not sharing who's COVID positive in your, company. But, there's also the aspect of, if you can prove as an employee that you contracted COVID at your workplace, and this is a state by state thing. So, again, I'm not providing legal advice. In most states, it is considered a workman's comp claim. And if you die from COVID, we've seen all this, like, it depends on the state. I'm not talking about Illinois specifically. Your heirs and family can sue your employer.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest concerns that I think employers have for sure, because there isn't real clear data on the liabilities yet. So,
Yeah.
you know what, I know I had a feeling you're going to have a ton of questions, Amanda, but there's a couple more things that I wanted to ask you. I saw Lisa Davidson post something too. Lisa, I promise I'll ask her that.
Okay, I'm not watching the chat at all because it's distracting for me.
Yeah, no, I completely get it. I was trying to pay attention, but as leaders of organizations, what should we be doing or implementing to ensure the safety of our employee population as we return back to the office, and what should be top of mind for employers to make sure that their employees are coming back in a safe manner?
Yeah, I mean, I think, number one, it's Brad and what Brad offers. So, looking at the space, I think that, between, there's enough entities out there and groups within, large leasing companies that can help you to look at your space and actually reconfigure it at that. So that's number one, is as an employer, you need to look at your space and what is your flow of your employees coming back into the office. So again, you're going to have to block off desks. It's not, people aren't going to just be able to come back in, I always say this kind of as a general thing, like, 20 years ago, we had giant cubicles with high walls. If you look at the way that workspaces are set up right now, there's no walls, and we're either on standing desks or non-standing desks, and we're on top of each other. We have a 6-foot desk, and that's, it. And that's fine, because that's the environment we're in. But now when COVID hit, everybody was like, oh crap, we need walls. Like we need plexiglass, we need space. So number one, I think, is looking at how your space is laid out and really thinking about the health and safety of your employees, from the hand sanitizer stations. Are you going to have coffee and snacks in the kitchen? Like, those are the things that seem dumb, but you need to be focused on that, because where are you going to have those bottlenecks of people coming in? The other thing is really, like, as the people come back to the office, what is that bottleneck of entering into the high-rise building, waiting for the elevators, going up the elevators? What is the building doing to limit those exposures and those connections? And then when you're in the office, is there a line of people waiting for the receptionist to check them in and let them into the office space, or people lining up behind the coffee machine? So these are all just things you need to start thinking about. And then ultimately, from an HR operations standpoint, and risk mitigation standpoint, is looking at the health of your population. So making really informed and smart decisions about, if Benny says he had a headache on Monday, and now he wakes up today and he has a headache, a sore throat and a stuffy nose. Well, guess what? You should peg Benny as somebody who's not necessarily COVID positive, but Benny, we don't want you to come into the office today. Like, we would like you to work virtually for the next 2 or 3 days, continue to report your symptoms, but we'd like to mitigate the risk now before you come in or Amanda comes in and infects Stacy, and then all of a sudden we're now, shutting down our office or our plant. I've said this 100 times, I feel like, but, we all saw this really early on in the pandemic when the pork industry got hit and food manufacturing got hit with COVID cases, and like a pound of bacon went to $10 a pound. Do you know what I mean? So there's always a downstream effect. And so how can we as leaders, identify any type of risk of COVID within our population of people or events, and then identify that risk and mitigate it and be able to say, hey, we got to pull these 2 or 3 people out and put them on COVID leave or work from home, because that's safer than exposing our office of 100 people or 50 people.
And you listen, in a real life example of that, Amanda, is like, so in order for me to even come to the office 24 hours prior to, I have to register and do a health check and like say
Right.
that I haven't been exposed, and then you come in and everything's been assigned, everything's been wiped down. I'm actually going to get kicked out of the office here in a minute because the cleaning crew's coming through to wipe everything down. And it's like, a certain time by 5:30, you're out. Everyone's out of the office because they have a whole crew behind us. But I'm with you. I mean, it's like there's a little element of human error in this, because if somebody's not open, honest, communicating how they're feeling in some capacity, or somebody's not managing how, that process, it gets a little hairy.
Yeah. I mean, like, I use these examples too. On Monday, I got an email from my apartment building saying that an employee of the building had self-reported he was COVID positive, or that they were COVID positive. It wasn't he. And so I'm like, great, thanks for sending the email. But is it the concierge? Is it the security guard? Is it the maintenance guy who came in and fixed my window last week? Like, I don't know. So, by having something with regard to the, the contact tracing side, you have that data and information to know, you came into this apartment, you interacted with this person, and then you can, mitigate the risk further from there.
Got it. And then the other thing, and you talked about this already, so I don't want to reiterate it too much, but I mean, there is a difference between GPS enabled versus Bluetooth enabled, right?
Correct.
And the main difference is that who's by another person, like who's spending time with who, but you just don't know where it is. It could be in a different state, a different country, or in the office, right?
Yeah. The tagline I always say is, I care, but I don't care where the contact happens. I just care about knowing that it happened.
Cool. So I wanted to give a little bit of time. We got 9 minutes for some questions that people wanted to ask. So I see something here from Lisa Davidson. Amanda, what about the? Oh geez, now my thing just. Hold on. Amanda, what about the undercounted natural immunity? I saw an article that all the undetected undercounted cases could bring us to herd immunity sooner, ?
Well, I'm going to say I'm not a physician and I'm not a doctor.
Yeah,
So,
and I don't take liability for any advice that these people are sharing.
Yeah, I
blame Benny.
I don't know specifically about that, those numbers. Could they possibly? Yes. But I mean, a member of the FDA came out recently and said, COVID-19 will likely be with us forever. Like, it may turn and eventually become, a much milder illness, but it's not like we're going to eradicate COVID and it's going to be gone tomorrow. And, this is where I get to be negative Nancy. I hate to say that, this is the first real pandemic of our generation that has hit the United States. And COVID's been around for a little bit, COVID was in Asia, and we just kind of said, oh, that's a problem over there. We didn't really focus on it. And then when it hit the United States, it was like, oh, wow, okay. And so, and now that it's spreading, they're saying now there's over 600,000 variants of COVID. That's scary. And the fact that the Pfizer vaccine is 90% effective. The Moderna vaccine is 94.5% effective, but right now they don't know what the effectiveness is on the new strain.
Got it. Thank you. Brad, I have a question specifically for you from my friend David Kipp. What are tenants requesting as far as amenities and/or layouts of office spaces now? Also, is there any area in Chicago or the suburbs that's actually booming during this time?
So I'll answer the first question. So we, going back to some of the statistics about knowing that everybody wants to come back to the office, the vast majority, and that everyone's craving that sort of collaboration, that connectivity. So we're seeing that collaboration space is going to be changed. There's going to be a transformation where there's going to be larger collaboration in community spaces within offices. And I think that in terms of amenities, we've been in over the last 5-7 years in what I would call the amenities war within office buildings themselves. They're trying to outdo each other with, rooftop decks and gyms that are amazing and offering them for free and bike rooms for days and lots of really cool things. So I think that trend is going to continue. They're obviously going to have to manage those amenities in terms of, better in terms of all the PPE, all the health checks, maybe some contact tracing that occurs, right? Because they need to now know who's in their building. But again, everything from a real estate side, everyone's planning for a post-COVID world, right? And so it's, how can we get back to the office and even lingering and living with COVID? And if this thing, to Amanda's point, doesn't go away, we do have to live with it. Obviously, we have to take steps in order to protect our employees. And then in terms of areas that are booming, major cities, the big thing that I focus on is labor, right? And where is labor? We call it workplace displacement. So major cities like Chicago and New York and San Francisco, we've seen everybody the rumors are that everyone's leaving to go to Texas and Florida and in those places. And there's lots of that, but that's not, the whole truth, because there's smaller cities that are also gaining a lot of traction, what I would call tier 3 cities, the Raleighs, the Madisons, those types of cities are actually gaining a lot of traction, but Chicago is not going anywhere. Downtown and the burbs are very quiet right now. We're just starting to see activity. We're just starting to see clients coming back to the office slowly. And I think that that's going to, that slow trend is going to continue through 2021. And I think it's going to pick up a lot of momentum towards the later part of this year.
Got it. If there's any other questions that you guys have for either of the three panelists, you can, well, we have like a couple of minutes left, I guess, but I highly recommend all three of them. I mean, throughout this whole COVID year, 12 months, these three have been people that I've been depending on for a lot of questions and answers, whether it's from me or either connecting like people that I know to. So I would think that LinkedIn would probably be the best way to connect with all three of them for the time being, and then you'll get some follow-up from this meeting, for attending this meeting, so with their contact info as well. So there's someone that asked how many days per month they expect to be at the office, but you know what, sorry Malcolm, I'm having issues with my poll here, so I don't think I'd be able to do that.
What was it? They asked how many days per month?
Yeah, how many days?
Well,
How many days per month they expect to be at the office?
yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, all the data pre-COVID showed that people were coming into the office just over 4 days a week pre-COVID, and that we think that it's going to be 3 days a week, you know, in a COVID environment. So, you know, and moving forward, and just like with remote work being part of everybody's daily life, and you know, the big question is going to be, what days a week are you going to come in? You know, chances are, like I said, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are going to probably be the high percentage days. But that's really what we believe is going to happen.
Okay, Brett, with that like the 3 days a week, do you think would they have everyone come back on the same days, or would they do like spread out? What do you think will happen?
So we're having these conversations now. Obviously, as we're kind of trickling back, you know, not everyone's coming back at full capacity right now. You know, maybe it's 20 or 25% of your office at any given capacity. It's getting, you know, people are up to 50% of our clients are coming back. I have just a very small percentage of clients that are like 90 to 100% back full time. That's not the norm. And I think that in this sort of 3 day a week that we're projecting is going to occur, that it's going to take a second for everyone to feel comfortable coming back 3 days, you know, at the same time on those 3 days. They may stagger it out and say half the group, maybe sales and marketing, you're coming in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe accounting, you're coming in these days, engineering, so on and so forth. So I think that there's going to be a little bit of a staged approach as people come back.
Got it.
Yeah, so they got to be aware of the state and local, you know, requirements with regard to the tier mitigation. Like I think right now Chicago's at 40%, max of 50 people per space. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's where it was. I mean, before it was at 25 people in a space. So that's another thing, another level of what employers are gonna have to manage is, you know, great, Brad, Benny and Stacy and Amanda have reported that they're coming to the office tomorrow and they're symptom free, but are we gonna now have 110 people in the office?
Yeah.
Got it. Well, sounds good. Amanda, Stacy, Brad, thank you so much for doing this. I think this was something that obviously I had a ton of questions on, and I figured most people did too. So I think there was like 50, it's a little less now, but there was like 55, 57 people that were logged on it. So thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you don't have my email. Yeah, thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Super optimistic, Amanda. That was optimistic. That was good.
I tried. I was like, I'm gonna put it on. I'm gonna do my
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Benny.
Bye, everyone.